What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. Welcome back, Nightmare Success listeners. I've got a treat for you today. Matt Cox is my guest, and I was lucky enough. I was on Matt's show. Was that Monday? I think it was Monday. Mm-hmm. And so Matt, very interesting guy. He probably, if you guys ever watched the movie Catch Me If You Can, with let's see who was in that.
Leonardo
DiCaprio. How in the world could I forget that name? Fascinating show, but Matt Cox kind of lived that life. He's the author of several books. He's the host of Inside True Crime podcast. He was more or less known as one of the mastermind mortgage fraud in the Southwest area, really the United States, once it kind of got going. Dateline called him the modern day Bonnie and Clyde. He's been chronicled in so many different things: Dateline, NBC, CNBC, American Greed, Fortune Magazine, all kinds of others. Fascinating. He's even involved, and I don't even know if this has gotten resolved, but he was involved with writing the memoir of the guy that the movie actually became War Dogs. And the guy, I think, was with him at the time that he served time with. He said, "Hey, I'll write this and let me get half of this or whatever." And that didn't happen. And I think they're still working that out. But the War Dogs movie became a huge deal. It was a big movie with Bradley Cooper and all the stars in it. So fascinating. I was a guest on his show, but I was so interested to know. I want to know about Matt Cox. So Matt, welcome in, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, the War Dogs thing, yes, by the way.
I'm curious.
We settled that after I got out of prison.
Okay.
It was Efraim Diveroli is the name of the character that Jonah Hill plays.
Yeah, Jonah Hill.
I wrote his memoir.
So it did get settled, because I couldn't tell from reading up on all this, because you got out in 2019, so I didn't know. It hasn't been that long, and thank God you weren't in there with COVID. I've interviewed and talked to so many guys that were in prison when COVID hit, and I mean, prison's a horrible place all the time, but having all those COVID restrictions and then having the COs just having free reign to enforce whatever they wanted to because it was convenient for them had to have been a nightmare. But you didn't have to go through that. I didn't either, which is fantastic.
No, but I kept in touch with a bunch of guys. Everybody's telling me, they're using COVID now as an excuse to not let them go to the rec yard. They've canceled all the programs. They've got them locked up all the time now, and they're just saying, "Oh, COVID."
Yeah, it's code word for no freedom, even in prison. Anything that you thought you might like as a release of some time escape of the mind, no, we're just going to call it COVID. And there were bad things in prison. I mean, the guys that would come in, we had a scabies run that was bad. And they loved to lock down and make it. I think those guys got locked down for like 2 weeks in that place, and I luckily was in the story below them, but that was a bad deal. Anyway, I got off on this, Matt. So tell me, because somebody that has lived the life you have. I mean, your life is like a movie. When you were growing up as a kid, were you living kind of a normal kid life? What was your life like growing up as a kid?
No, because I didn't really go to public school. Like, I went to public school initially, and I failed like the second grade. And, I had a learning disability. And so I ended up having to go to special schools that were small, schools that were an hour away from where we lived or 45 minutes away from where we lived. So, I grew up, I didn't have friends in the neighborhood. There's barely any kids my age at the school. So, there's the schools with 25, 30 kids in them.
Did they diagnose that pretty early with you with the dyslexia?
It was. I had done really well on all of the, on all the IQ tests.
Yeah.
So so they didn't understand, like I had like 139 and 140, IQ, and they were saying, that's
kind of wicked smart.
Yeah, but he could barely read, if at all. He's, and it's, so they did several tests. Obviously, it was just a battery of tests, and then they eventually just came back and said, "Yeah, listen, we think he's got dyslexia," and I was diagnosed with auditory and visual dyslexia, which means that if you and I are having a conversation and two people next to me start talking, I can't hear anything you're saying. It immediately becomes Charlie Brown's teacher. It's like wah 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 wah. I don't know why. Just that, it's like if the TV's on and you're talking, I can't focus on anything. I'm like, well, we got to go over here, or hey, let me shut the TV off. Or
I'm curious. I'm curious because there's something I read where one of the teachers said, "Hey, you better figure out something to do labor-wise. Do something with your hands because you aren't going to make it in the smart world." Was that? If I was told that as a kid, and I know, and in your personality is one I can tell. Was that something of a driving force of yours to not?
Well, first, it wasn't that brutal.
Okay.
It wasn't like you're not going to make it in the smart world. It was in. Well, I mean, obviously, I'd heard this during in school, but when I went to college and I was trying to get a degree in business, my counselor was just like, "Listen, that's."
So you were a little older too, then.
Yeah. He was like, "It's just not going to happen," and he's like, "You need to figure out something to do with your, with your hands, something to do." And I was like, "Okay, well, I paint and I draw. Like I'm an artist, so I changed my major to art." And of course, I got straight A's.
Yeah.
Even my core classes, I got, it was just a vastly different. Almost everything was multiple choice. And
are you left-handed?
No.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
What? That's like a thing, right? Like
it's kind of a thing. I mean, I'm left-handed and my wife is left-handed, and there's something where we think on the other side of the brain. We're right brain instead of left brain, so that you come at things differently. Like standardized tests are an absolute nightmare. An essay, lovely. It's just different.
Yeah, well, the spelling is an issue for me with the essays.
Yeah.
But I could certainly write an essay. Well, either way, it was, so I ended up getting a degree in fine arts from USF, which prepared me to do pretty much nothing.
That's kind of. I have a political science degree, and there's not a lot you can go. I mean, you can become an attorney, but that's not necessarily.
Yeah,
I get it. Yeah. So what were you thinking when you got out of that? Because you ended up, I think, in an insurance job, which is kind of one of those things where that's where I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing while I'm doing this. I'm assuming that's what you were thinking.
Well, my father had worked for State Farm Insurance.
Okay.
And he was a manager for State Farm Insurance. And so, I barely graduated high school, and then I went to college, and he really just didn't think I was going to, he was thinking more vocational school, go to a VOTEC, get a degree, or to learn how to fix, air conditioners or something along those lines.
What was your relationship like with him? Because, father figures always play a role in our lives.
Even though he lived in our house, he essentially worked about 70, 80 hours a week just because he wanted to. He would go to work in the morning before I got up, and then he'd come home at 6 o'clock that night. And, he came home and dinner needed to be ready.
Yeah.
So 6:30, we're all eating dinner. He would go into the den and start reading. And that was pretty much it. Like, I just didn't see this guy much. And when I did see him, the most of the times when he wasn't working, he would go on drunken binges and he would drink for a week or two. And then but he was such a good manager at State Farm. He was always in like the top, at the top of sales, all the competition, top sales, everything. So every year he won the 2 weeks to go to Hawaii or Germany or wherever it was. They were sending these top ranking guys in the nation. He did really well. And so when he did go, he would sober up for 6 months, 3 months, maybe a year. And then he'd go on a drunken binge for a week or two. And then State Farm would figure it out. And they would put him into like a detox.
Yeah.
And he'd be in there for, one time they put him in for, I'm telling you, it had to be 60 to 90 days.
How did your mom play into all this?
She was an enabler. Yeah. She, don't tell the neighbors, oh, get your father inside. He's drinking and
let's look normal. Right.
Yeah, exactly. It was that time period where everybody wanted to fit in. You don't want to be, you don't want to be that guy. And so, yeah,
that makes a little bit more sense than why you had picked the insurance profession, because you'd lived by it and around it with your dad growing up forever.
Yeah. What's so funny about that was that the last semester of school that I went to take, the insurance licenses in Florida. There's like a 440 license and a 220 license. And the 220 is like the big one. And you can basically accidentally pass the 440, right? Okay. So it's like it's a life and health. It's 440. The other one's property casualty and everything else under the sun. So that's the hard one. So I went to school at night for that. I took a course at night, and then during the day, I went to school about 15 credit hours a week. And about a week or two before I graduated college, I took the test for the insurance test, and I passed it. And I remember, and what's funny is right then you get your results right then. And my father had me so convinced that I was not going to pass it. He said, "You understand that my agents, I had the best agents some of the best agents in the nation.
You don't have a chance."
Right. He said, so he had like 25 guys working for him. Half of them failed it. He goes, half my agents failed the test the first time. He goes, so you're probably going to have to take it 2 or 3 times. And if we have to, I'll get you a tutor, whatever. I was like, okay. And so I go and I take the test, and the 3 people in front of me, as you're standing in line, you have like the little card, right? For multiple choice. You give it to them. They ran it through, and they'd look at the guy and say, okay, well, you didn't pass. You can reschedule in 30 days.
Yeah.
And then they'd hand them like a piece of paper and say, call this number. They go, okay, thanks. And they'd walk off. Next guy, same thing. Sat there. And she goes, okay, I'm sorry you didn't pass. Gave him a piece of paper, call this number. Okay, next guy, sorry you didn't pass. Here's a piece of paper, call this number. You can reschedule. Okay. I give him the thing. She goes, okay, stand over there. And I went, okay. I said, so when can I retake it? And she goes, no, you're done. You passed. She said, stand over there. You got to get your picture taken. Get your license. And I was like, well, what? Like, I was like, what? No. My dad said I'd never pass.
Yeah.
So I drove straight to my dad's office and walked into his office and put the pass thing down and sat it down. And I said, that test was a joke.
What'd he say?
He looked at it, he goes, no. And I said, yeah. He said, my God. And he was like, I can't believe you passed it. I said, yeah, nothing. It's a joke. So anyway, I graduated college and immediately tried to get a job with State Farm Insurance. Back then they had something called an aptitude test.
Yeah.
So I took the insurance aptitude test with State Farm and I failed it. Even though they say it's not a pass fail, it's a we'll hire you, we won't.
Right.
They wouldn't. So then I went and I took one with like USAA or something like that. I took the same test. They wouldn't hire me. And they were so perplexed. They actually had me come back and do it again because they were like, we don't understand. Like
why didn't this work out?
Yeah, you were great. You had 2 interviews. Listen, I went to multiple companies that were offering me jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'd give me the aptitude test. I would fail it. And then they would come back and they'd say, yeah, I'm sorry, we can't hire you. So I ended up working like construction jobs.
Okay.
Well, no, you know what? I didn't. I worked as an insurance adjuster for about a year.
Okay.
Yeah. For a workman's comp company.
Yeah.
And another company too.
So how did you
end up? I got laid off.
How did you end up finding the mortgage brokerage mortgage world? Where did that come? Was it that just the next step, or did you know somebody that was in that, or how did that all happen?
I was dating a girl. That was a stripper.
Mm-hmm.
And
she was a mortgage broker.
No, listen, she met a guy who owned a mortgage company.
Oh.
At the club.
Wow. Okay.
With 4 or 5 other executives of this lender. It wasn't even a mortgage brokerage business. It was a lender.
Okay.
And
mortgage
they
lender.
talked to her. Now, keep in mind, she was about to graduate with her degree in finance.
Okay.
So, you know how it's always the cliche.
It's always the story. She's putting herself through college. And yeah.
Right. Yeah. She was putting herself through college.
She was putting herself through college.
Together
right.
for 3 years.
Yeah.
So she's about to graduate. So they talked to her. And, so the guy was like, he explained what she did and the fact that she could follow what he did
mm-hmm.
and understood it. And they realized, wow, you really are taking classes. Like you're
smart.
And so they said, look, why don't you come to work for us? And so the owner of the company hired her as a broker. And she told me, you have got to do this. You have to be a mortgage broker.
That's how you got into it.
So that's what I did. I went and I became a mortgage broker. So
you become the mortgage broker. You're in the wild, wild west of mortgages at that time. It was at like 2000 something.
No, 2000. It was like 1999.
1999. Yeah, the world was going into the next few years was going to be whatever history will call all that. But so you get into that. Do you like it?
Yeah, I loved it. I was great at it.
Yeah.
It was like I'd never been that good at anything. You know, maybe with the exception of like art, or I'd never really thrived at anything like I did with.
I mean, that's how it reads. It sounds like you came into this world and you were really good at it, and then there were some gray lines or gray areas where a lot of people were playing in the gray in that time period, and
I mean. You know, there's no gray. Like it was fraud. I mean, you know,
well, no, I'm saying that there were people. I'm not saying you. I'm saying in the world of mortgage and what was going on. I mean, at the time when the world collapsed, there was all kinds of things that were being done where people were getting out, 3, 4, 5 mortgages. They didn't have any income to back it up. All those different things, and all that stuff was going through.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how did this all concoct in your mind of, I'm going to do a fraud. I'm going to make this.
The very first loan I did. The very first loan I did had fraud in it. I mean, I brought I had this woman come in, single mother, wanted to buy a house, had a real estate agent gave her to me,
mm-hmm.
and she had 5% down. She could put 5% down on the house, and she had horrible credit.
Mm-hmm.
But I worked for a subprime lender, got her qualified, and I brought her file into my mortgage the manager of the brokerage business. She looked through everything, and then she pulled like one piece of paper out and sat it to the side. And she said, look, it's a great file. Your client's been 30 days late on her rent in the last 24 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what? Like, that's a deal killer.
Mm-hmm.
She was 30 days late. So, and she said, yeah. And she goes, and I said, oh man, I just thought, oh man, that's it. I'm done. Like I banked everything on becoming a mortgage broker.
Mm-hmm.
Like I stopped doing everything I was doing to pay my bills. I'm now behind on everything because I felt like I would be good at it. And I saw the kind of money you could make.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember I was like probably at this point a month or so behind on my truck. I was behind on everything anyway,
mm-hmm.
but I was behind on my mortgage payment because I had actually bought 2 houses by this point. Well, a townhouse and a condo. So I just, it was bad. Like I was like, I got a major problem here. And she looked at me and I said, wow, what do I do? And I said, I guess it's dead. And she pulled out a little thing of whiteout and started shaking it up. And she goes, white it out, make a copy, stick it in the file. They'll never catch it. I was like, are you serious? And she goes, I do it all the time. And I went, that's fraud. Yeah. And she was like, she goes, yeah. And I said, oh my God. And I said, I don't know. Can I get in trouble? She said, I mean, the worst that happens if they catch it and think you had something to do with it, they'll fire you. Most likely they just turn the loan down. She said, nobody's going to call the FBI. It's fine. And so, I trusted her. I went and made the copy, stuck it in there, was terrified for about 3 or 4 days. It went through underwriting. A few days later, we closed, and I got a check for like $3,000, maybe $3,500.
That's your first
And so
deal.
the first deal, next guy that came in, he made like $45,000 a year. So he didn't quite have enough money to buy the property. But if he made like $52,000, he could have bought it. So I took his W-2s and I changed them. I altered them slightly. Now he made $52,000 on average. He barely made enough money now, and he was able to get the loan. The loan closed, and I made $3,000. Next person that came in, there was some other issue. Next person that came in, and I started realizing that like almost all my customers had an issue. Almost all of them. So yeah,
and you can make it work. So,
but I immediately started making money.
Oh yeah, made good money. I think it was 2002 when it comes down on you. Can you kind of walk me through what was going on at that time, and did you know that something was coming at you at that point?
Well, that one company I worked for, they ended up closing.
Okay.
Right. So they actually got shut down by like the Department of Banking and Finance, and I think the FBI closed them or something too. I'm not even sure. I wasn't there, but one day there was like more. The front doors are chained. Yeah. And so I ended up taking a bunch of files and going to another mortgage company. And then eventually I opened my own company. Like very quickly, within months, I've opened my own company. I hired a bunch of guys, ran up my credit cards, hired a bunch of guys to come work for me, had a dozen guys working for me by 2000.
Okay.
By 2000, I got my own place. I'd had, about a dozen guys, a couple guys working at home, guys in the office. And we started just kind of running a mill. We just started running through everybody that walked in the door. We did everything we could to get them a loan. And so now we're doing, I don't know what it is, $5 or $10 million a month in mortgages, and we're just cranking them out. And now at this point, I started getting really, really creative. So it wasn't like changing a W-2 anymore. Now you don't have enough money in your bank account. So I'm altering the bank statements, and then that got to be a pain in the ass. So I just started making banks online, a website for a bank.
Yeah.
And then I would call it like Bank of Ybor. And I have a whole website.
It had a website?
Oh, it's in multiple pages, everything. Phone number, the whole thing. So it would be, bankofybor.com. Like it wasn't a big deal. I just opened it up and the whole thing was perfect. It looked great. And then I had Bank of Ybor bank statements. Color, in front and back color bank statements.
Looked just like the regular bank statements.
I could print out the bank statements showing you have enough money in your name, and then I could put those in the file and show that you had your down payment.
So were you thinking at that time when you were doing all that, oh my God, I could get caught doing this, or you were on such a high or such an adrenaline rush that it was just, you were figuring out new ways, better ways to make it work?
Well, we did get caught. That's the whole thing, is I did get caught.
Yeah.
I got caught multiple times. So I got caught multiple times, and I was just convinced the bank, they'd call up and they're like, look, this is fraud. Like these are canceled checks. They look like canceled checks, but they're not canceled checks. They just look like them. Or this guy doesn't even work here.
Uh-huh.
This company doesn't even exist.
And
or for whatever reason.
So then what would happen?
I'd say, well, that's crazy. So what are you saying? You feel like you think my borrower made a company?
Yeah.
And they said, well, honestly, Matt, I don't know what your borrower did. I think maybe your mortgage broker did it. My mortgage broker, he would never
Not something like that. No.
I've known this guy for 2 years. He is above board, very ethical. He would never, I'm offended. I did the whole thing.
Yeah.
But in the end, they just wouldn't close the loan. And we, during that conversation, figure out how they figured out what was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We'd correct it. We'd send it to another lender. Boom, it'd close.
It'd go through. Wow.
We'd go through.
Wow.
They'd get their check. I'd get my check. And we'd just keep churning them out. And, you just kept getting better and better. It got to a point where somebody would come in and they would have, let's say, had 4 jobs in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And it was like, this is a pain in the ass. It's easier for me to just make the pay stubs and say they work for this company over here that I've created than to be honest and try and have to track down all 4 of these companies, get their W-2s, put it all together. It's too much. Let's just have them say they work here.
Well, what's crazy is you think, on the outside, people just, everyday life think that there's a lot more pieces to that it just doesn't go through because there's some kind of magic system that doesn't allow that. And you were working all around the edges of that and that we're just going through. You just had to find the right bank.
There is a magic system, but I knew the system.
That's what I mean. You figured it out. So Matt, in this time period in 2002, was it a surprise when you get indicted, or did you know that something was coming at you, or was it just like, oh my God, here it is?
So I only knew I only knew because this woman that worked for me at one point, she had went and started her own company, and she ended up getting kind of roped into a scam, like a straw man scam, where she was running all the paperwork for a scam for these Italian guys that were buying properties and pulling out money and not making any payments. Well, those loans got investigated by the FBI. FBI came in and they raided her office. She cooperated with the FBI, and she ended up calling me one day and asking me if I would have lunch with her. I said, sure, no problem. So I met her and her husband for lunch.
Which was all a setup, I guess.
It was all a setup. The FBI was actually sitting at the next table. They were wired. And halfway through the conversation, I just started burying myself. Mm-hmm. Like they asked me, they said, oh my gosh, they know about this, they know about that. And without getting too much into it, it led back to me and my wife at the time. Mm-hmm. And, I immediately started saying, oh my gosh, you didn't tell them this, did you? You didn't tell them this. Like, they don't know the W-2s are fake, do they? They don't know this. They don't know that. And I start trying to come up with some kind of a story that they can tell the FBI to kind of fix the situation. And in the course of that whole conversation, I realized that they're wired. Like, they're just too over the top asking questions. And at some point,
they want to know too much.
And at some point, the husband of this woman, her name is Gretchen. Gretchen's husband stands up because they're like, oh, we don't want to lie to the FBI. We can't lie to him. Like, what are you talking about? You've been lying to him this whole investigation. And he stands up and says, we've never lied to the FBI.
Yeah.
We may not have told them everything, but we've never lied. Mm-hmm. And of course it was like, what do you, mm-hmm. Why would you say that? Like, who are you telling that to? I know the truth. Mm-hmm. So you're not telling me you haven't lied when clearly know that I know you've been lying. So who is it? And then I realized they're wired. Mm-hmm. They end up
sweat.
Oh, I knew right then I was done, and I actually said to her, I hope you're going to get something for this. Mm-hmm. She started crying. She said, well, I don't have to go to jail. And I said, she said, I have a kid. I said, well, I have a kid. And she's like, Matt, I'm sorry. I said, well, just tell the FBI to call me. Tell them not to come into my office. And I get up and I leave. So the FBI agent calls me 20 minutes later at my office. I go to my office. 20 minutes later, he calls. Didn't even pretend they weren't wired. Right. So I tell him, okay, I'll come down and talk to you. And instead I get an attorney, pay an attorney $75,000. And that attorney ends up negotiating a plea deal where I plead guilty to wire fraud. And I agree to not renew my license and I couldn't run the mortgage company anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was it. Like at that time, I didn't cooperate against what they wanted me to do. My lawyer was telling me I could do what's called a pretrial intervention,
mm-hmm.
where he was saying, if you cooperate with them and you give them more cases, I can keep you from being indicted.
Okay.
And I was like, and I didn't do that. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not, I've seen The Godfather.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep my mouth quiet. I'm not keep my mouth shut.
Stand-up guy. Right.
Yeah. The stand-up guy, which, looking back now, if I had known then what I knew now,
sure,
I would have pulled a pickup truck up to my office in the middle of the Friday meeting
mm-hmm.
with the 10 or 12 guys standing there, walked in with a dolly and loaded up the file cabinets and driven them straight to the FBI's office
mm-hmm.
and cooperated against every single one of those guys. Because every single one of those guys, when things started going bad, immediately started cooperating against me.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and everybody I know across the board has cooperated.
Well, and it scares people to death. I mean, that when people sit on their doorstep and say, "Hey, by the way, if you don't help us out, you're going to prison," and it changes people's way they say they're going to act and how they're going to act and how they see you as friends and so on and so forth. But interesting that you didn't do that. But so I think is the next step to this, though, Matt. And I couldn't really quite make sure that I was piecing this together right. You get indicted, you plea. Is it right after that you say, I'm out of here? Like you take, when do you become the fugitive that ends up being the guy?
That doesn't happen for another year and a half.
Okay. So where do you go after this?
Well, I don't go anywhere. I mean, I'm still basically running the mortgage company. I sell it to a friend of mine on paper. He was an accountant.
So you keep that. You have somebody else it's in their titled in their name, and they're doing what you are not supposed to be doing because you're not licensed.
Right. So we open up another company as a development company, and I decide that I'm going to raise money for this company, and I'm going to start developing new properties in an area of Tampa called Ybor City. And I thought, well, how can I raise the money to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I'll just run a scam. Like I've been changing documents here and there, but these have all been legitimate, real people.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna, I by that point I knew the system so well that I decided I was just going to start creating synthetic identities,
mm-hmm.
and we called them, phantom borrowers. So I was going to start creating my own borrowers, and so what I did was I figured out how to get Social Security to issue me Social Security numbers to people that don't exist.
It's interesting. Because that's the most important number.
Yeah. So what I did was I got I started creating birth certificates, fake birth certificates. I ordered the security paper, and then I get I get shot records. Like I created a shot record. And so, I had to buy all these. It's complicated, but I had to create a birth certificate and a fake shot record for a child that would be, let's say, 9 or 10 months old. Because if the child's over 12 months old, you have to come in with the kid. You can bring your birth certificate, your driver's license, your birth certificate, and your child who's 2 years old. But if he's under 12 months old, you can just come in with the shot record. So I came in with the shot record, birth certificate, and I convinced Social Security to issue me a Social Security number to my 10-month-old daughter
mm-hmm.
or son. And then I would take that Social Security number and I would order 3 secured credit cards. So I would go online and apply for some credit cards, get denied. That would create a credit profile. I'd then order 3 secured credit cards, and I'd get those credit cards and I'd start making the payments. Well, after like 6 months, I'd end up with like 710, 720.
You end up with good credit. Yeah.
Right. And it's new credit, but it's still, you only needed a 620 credit score at that time. So I've got 700. So of course, I would then have this person. They would work at it. They'd work a job. I could make their W-2s and pay stubs. I had a job. I had an employment company set up to employ them. I had websites. I had a management company that could verify their employment. So I would do all of these things. All these were legitimate companies that were set up. And so I would create these different characters. These are some different synthetic identities, and I would go out and I'd buy a property for, let's say, $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
So buying a property in Ybor City for $50,000 is, it's a piece of crap.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't get it appraised for much more than I bought it. So I figured what I needed to do is I need to buy a bunch of properties in each person's name. And then when I buy the property, I'll record the sales price of that property. Instead of buying it for $50,000 and recording it at $50,000, I'm going to buy it at $50,000 and record it at $200,000.
Okay.
So I'd buy a property for $40,000, record it at $190, buy one for $55,000, record it at $220, another one at $190, all within this one little crappy area called Ybor City. And so I bought all of these houses in these different people's names and recorded the value. And what that did was it drove the value in that area up
all the comps.
The roof.
Yeah.
Right. So the comparable sales are shoot way up.
Sure.
And now my guy who bought 5 houses for $50,000 a piece, those houses are now worth over $1 million. So I would then have him refinance the properties, which he doesn't exist. So he can't even sign the paperwork.
And you make up really funny character names with this that I don't know if you did that. I don't know if you did that because you thought this is so fun. I'm going to take Tarantino's characters and name them out, or I'm going to do Simpsons. I mean, you were playing an edgy game, Matt, and then you kind of made it into fun for you, I think, because these characters were characters that anybody could have looked up, but you used them as synthetic characters and they were buying properties.
Yeah, I wasn't really thinking that far in advance. Initially, the guys' names were normal names. Like the first few I did,
it was used like colors for a while, like Mr. Green.
No, that's what it ended up being. Initially, it was Alan. It was Alan Duncan, Joel Cologne, just normal people. Then I saw the movie
Reservoir Dogs.
Reservoir Dogs by Quentin Tarantino, and I ended up naming, like, the first guy was named like Lee Black, and then it became James Red, and there was
Mr. Green.
There was Brandon Green and William Blue and Michael White. So yeah, it just got more and more.
Well, I think the other interesting thing is that you are doing this, like, some people get convicted and curl up in a fetal position, or they say, oh my God, I never want to be in that position again. That was really scary. That was the federal government. I'm going to do everything I can to avoid that. You actually went out and got better at what you were doing while you were in a 42-month probation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, I wasn't thinking super clearly. So yeah, I instead, I was on federal probation. I have my probation officer coming by my office while I'm cutting up pay stubs and W-2s. I'm making canceled checks. He walks up to me in the middle of cutting these things up. I remember I had like 6 or 8 cell phones on my credenza behind me. There's no reason for me to have 8 cell phones.
Mm-mm.
Never even occurred to him. Like, he's like, hey, how's it going? I was like, oh, hey, what's going on? How you doing? And he talked to me for a couple minutes and walk out of the room, and
everything was
no
good.
Big deal. Never even realized. And I kept getting more and more emboldened by it. Like, I would get caught. I got caught one time by a company called South Star Bank, and they realized that the person didn't exist. Like, I was supposed to make the first payment on a property, and my buddy was supposed to make the first payment, and he didn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he didn't do it on purpose. He's just an idiot. He just forgot. So but they immediately investigated the loan, realized it was fraud. And I ended up calling them up as that person. And I convinced them, they're about to call the FBI. I convinced them not to call the FBI to let me pay them back because they were about to lose over $100,000. Mm-hmm. They were like, no, we're going to foreclose on the property. We'll get the property back and sell it. I said, no, you won't. I said, no, you won't. I said, the property is worth about 30 or 40 grand. Mm-hmm. You lent me 140 or 150,000. You're going to lose 100 grand. Mm-hmm. And I explained exactly what I did. Mm-hmm. And they were just in shock. And then they said, okay, can you just send us the money back? And I said, sure. So I sent them the money back, and they never called the FBI.
Oh, wow. Well, I think the other thing that's kind of interesting is that they make a big deal about a lot of different things that they look up when you look up your name about the Associates, the book that you wrote that was a fiction book, but the FBI and all the different people and the journalists in that say, hey, that was him. That was him creating this mastermind of what, and it's the same guy, goes to the same school, and then he takes over basically the southern part of the United States, perpetuating this mortgage fraud. And you even talked about it. I mean, I'm assuming you tried to get it published. I don't know, but people knew about this book. But it's a kind of a big deal in the world of when the Associates is that character. Was it Matt Cox? Was that you?
No, I mean so I had written a manuscript called The Associates mm-hmm. that was just talking about a mortgage, kind of like The Firm, where a guy he starts a mortgage company. He ends up getting roped into a mortgage case, a fraud case that he had nothing to do with. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind, I'm blatantly committing fraud. The character in that book is not.
Right.
And this is the way I always explain it. Are there similarities? Yes. Mm-hmm. But that character is as much me as any of John Grisham's characters are him.
And any of his books, right? Because it's a piece of him writing. Yeah.
Right. Because, think about it. He's probably pulling some stuff from real life. But the truth is, their big thing was Matt Cox is a mortgage broker. And the guy in the book is a mortgage broker. It's him. Mm-hmm. No. John Grisham is a lawyer. His characters are all lawyers. Mm-hmm. Those characters are not him.
Well, it makes for an interesting discussion.
Right. And so what they did was there was a bunch of articles about that.
Yes.
And they were trying to say it was a blueprint.
Yeah, he gave it away.
Yeah.
It was another thing that he was having fun with. He wrote it out before he did it. And why didn't you guys figure it out? But I'll say going into this, the other thing is that you took the risk not only of being on federal probation, but you brought in women into your world to, whether they call it Bonnie and Clyde or whatever, but you had 3 or 4 different women that were a big part of helping you along the way with this. Did that give you any sense of, wonder if she would turn on me? Because it's kind of what happened in the end.
No, I didn't. I wasn't thinking about that. I mean,
plus you were you were written about as this, the Casanova guy. You could do art. You had the fancy stuff, and you lured them into, the world of your world, and they would have never created these things or crimes if you weren't such this shiny object.
That is what they said, but that's not. I don't see that as being true. Yeah. That's something that it's like the newspaper reporters. They went with The Associates was really me because it sounds good.
It does. It's a fantastic read when you read what they've written. Yeah.
Right. Well, the women, they were also saying that I was a Don Juan. I would convince these women to fall in love with me, and then I would convince them to commit fraud. But the truth is, I didn't convince anybody. People knew what I was doing, a little here, a little there, and I would date some girl, or maybe even not date her, and they would just work for me, and they'd say, "Look, I want to be in on this. I want to do the loans." I have one mortgage broker who was like, "I want to do the loans that for these people," because she could charge $4,000 or $5,000 and charge points on the loan. Mm-hmm. So if the guy's borrowing $200,000, she can charge 2 points. She can get $4,000 on the back of the loan. Mm-hmm. She could charge $4,000 on the front of the loan. She gets $8,000.
Yeah, making good money.
Right. And we're closing these loans, like a couple of them every month. Like I did this on like the FBI said 109 houses.
Mm-hmm.
So, in all these different characters. So these are, and that broker is a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Several of these women were brokers.
Yeah.
So that's not, but to them, they're like, oh, he convinced them.
Oh, no, it's a lot more juicy for you to be the Casanova that can make these an artist and you have these fancy places and you allure them in to become criminals. And what I think, I want to know like what it was like to be a fugitive because, I talked to Seth Ferrante, which and,
right.
His situation is that he got more confident the longer he was in. And then he just kind of like, yeah, I think they've got it. And that's kind of when he got caught. How did it work for you?
Well, at the time I was doing the loans in Ybor City with those synthetic identities, I wasn't on the run.
Right.
It wasn't until a friend of mine who was a sheriff's deputy showed up and told me that a task force had been put together to investigate me.
Mm-hmm.
A guy that I was working with.
So you got tipped off a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. A buddy I was working with got caught. He was cooperating with the task force. Task force was handed over to the FBI. The sheriff's deputy came to me and said, look, this is what's happening. They're going to come arrest you.
Mm-hmm.
So I took off on the run. With this girl I was dating, her name was Rebecca Hout.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know what I was doing. I told her the couple of days before I took off on the run, she begged and pleaded to come with me.
Mm-hmm.
I was packing my bags. I remember I was packing my bags when she showed up, and we had a date that night I'd forgotten about. Like I have bigger issues,
right?
And I didn't even know this girl. I'd been dating her like a month and a half, and she showed up, and I told her what happened, and I had like $80,000 to my name at the time in cash. I mean, we had like $1 million, but it's all in the bank or it's wrapped up.
Get to it, right?
Yeah. Or it's in property. We got millions in properties, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I take the money, run up my credit cards, take her, go straight to Atlanta. And I run a scam there and make like a little over $400,000. I rent somebody's house.
Mm-hmm.
I then make an ID as him, saying I'm him. His name is Michael Shanahan.
That's interesting. I know a Michael Shanahan. It's a good friend of mine.
Yeah. I refinance his house 3 times. I get 3 hard money lenders to refinance his house at the same time. So what I do is I went down to public records and I satisfied the loan on his house.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm living in a house as Michael Shanahan worth $200,000 and there's no mortgage on the house. And if you pull my credit, there's no credit.
Right.
So his mortgage, which is still showing up on his credit, isn't showing on mine because I'm using a different social security number.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a different credit profile. So when they pull that credit profile, nothing shows up. I've got a couple credit cards that I just recently opened.
Mm-hmm.
I have a house worth $200,000. I have 3 hard money lenders come. They look at the house. They all say, yeah, I'll lend you the money. I close on all those within a day or 2 of each other. They lend me $450,000. I pull that money out in cash. I take off to the next place.
Where'd you go?
We went to Charlotte, North Carolina, but I ran another scam in South Carolina.
Yeah.
I bought a couple.
Those Montgomery Burns. C. Montgomery Burns, wasn't it?
Yeah. That was. I satisfied the loan. Like I bought a couple of houses there, and I satisfied the loans in those houses. And when I signed the satisfactions, I signed C. Montgomery Burns, which is the aging tycoon in The Simpsons.
Yes.
Yeah. The judge. I thought it was cute, but the judge.
I bet he did.
When I got sentenced, the judge didn't think it was funny at all. So. Yeah, so now I own several houses and I borrowed like $1.3 million. But by this point, I'd figured out I wasn't making fake IDs. I was just going into the DMV and getting them to give me an ID. Like I could either make a fake birth certificate and use a social security number and get an ID, or the other thing I was doing was I was interviewing homeless people. I was like surveying homeless people telling the homeless people I was a surveyor for the Salvation Army.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would fill out a survey for me and give me all the information I needed to steal their identity. Unbeknownst to them, they thought they were filling out a survey.
Yeah, they thought they were filling out a survey for the census?
No, for the Salvation Army.
Oh, for the Salvation Army. Yeah.
To try and determine where the Salvation Army was going to place their next homeless facility.
Got it. That makes sense, though. I mean,
it did to them.
Thinking that makes sense. Yeah.
I paid them $20. I had a little badge that said
and you
Salvation
end up with their
Army.
Social Security number.
Their Social Security number, their mother's maiden name, where they were born,
mm-hmm.
Their date of birth, their full name, where they went to high school, if they were ever in the military, if they were currently on any government subsidies, if they'd ever been convicted of a felony, when the last time they were gainfully employed, and if they felt they were ever going to be gainfully employed again, and if they'd ever been in the military, and if they'd ever had a passport or identification, and in what state.
Mm-hmm. I think it's, when you there was a point, I think it was in the Atlantic article where they're talking about that you were in a bookstore, and I think it was Fortune magazine, and the article was about you, and then they were talking about different people that were affected by what you were doing, and it's like your conscience hit you, and it's like, I didn't know those people were that. Did that happen?
Yeah, I had one of the scams that Rebecca Haupt, the girl that I went on the run with, we had gone to Tallahassee, mm-hmm. and we rented a house, satisfied the loan on the house. So we rented a house from a guy, like a man who was the ex-husband of the woman that owned the house. He said she lived in Miami. She was retired and lived in Miami. He was in his 60s. And he said he was renting out the house for her. Okay, so we go in the house. We actually didn't even look in the house. We just looked in the windows. And I said, yeah, I'll rent it. I gave him the first month and a deposit, got the keys, and immediately went downtown and satisfied the loan on the house. So now I own this house free and clear. It's probably worth maybe $100,000. Mm-hmm. We then borrowed a mortgage on that house for like $50-something thousand. And as soon as we borrowed the money, pulled the money out, and left. Took maybe a few weeks to set it up, right? I mean, it really only took a day to set it up, but you had to wait for the satisfaction to get recorded. We had to wait for title work. We had to all that. So we get 55, 56,000, something like that. I forget what it was exactly, but we get that money. And so that was this one scam. The other scam was in South Carolina. I had bought a house from a doctor and his wife, and then refinanced the house several times, borrowed like $1 million on the house, pulled the money out. Well, when the Forbes article came out, suddenly I'm reading this article and I look down and it says that the woman that I had refinanced her house was in a wheelchair. Mm. And I was like, I didn't know that, And the girl I was dating at the time, I remember she looked at me like, oh my God, like, you did that? And I was like, whoa, I never met this woman. I met her ex-husband. She lived in Miami. I was in Tallahassee. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. And then the other one was the doctor. They were like, oh, he had a sick child, and you knew he had a sick child, and you took advantage because he was in a bad position. I never met these people. I was shown the house by a realtor. The realtor certainly never said anything about a sick child. I didn't even go upstairs. We walked in the house. I looked around downstairs and I said, looks good to me. Let's put a contract on it. Let's go to the next house. We walked out because I was trying to find someone to own or finance. But the article came out and it made it sound, it was like he targeted these people.
You're preying on them, right?
He preyed on them. He knew they were in a vulnerable position. He knew, like, I didn't meet these people's children. I didn't talk to them, except for at the closing table, I met them. Mm-hmm. And the conversation was very, very...
always is, yeah.
Yeah, very brief, very, oh, okay. Oh, what are you planning on doing? Did you just move to the area? Oh, we've lived here. We're moving to Atlanta. Oh, okay. Okay, great. That was it.
So so that all happened there. The girl that you were with at the time, did that change anything with you and her?
No.
She
knew who I was. She wasn't, she was like, she knew, listen, by this point, she's heard so many things, read so much stuff. Like at this point, she's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, walk us through, Matt, when it all comes down on you and you end up negotiating yourself into, I think they were going to charge you with like 400 years or something. Can you kind of just walk the listeners through what happened to you once they put you on the most wanted list, and how did you get caught, and then what did you do?
Well, I ended up on I was on the Secret Service's most wanted one after I went to Atlanta, but then I went to Charlotte, North Carolina. I borrowed like $1.3 million. I was pulling that out of the bank, and I found out I actually got caught. I was handcuffed in Charlotte and taken downtown because the bank had called the police and said that a fraud was being committed. I convinced the detective that I hadn't done anything wrong, and he doesn't know I'm Matt Cox. He thinks my name's Gary Sullivan, and I convinced him that the bank had made a mistake and I hadn't actually done anything wrong.
You're somebody
and
else.
He let me go.
Yeah, that's crazy. So you just absolutely walk out.
I just walk out of the police station.
Wow.
So what ends up happening is I actually, at that point, probably within a few days of then, I actually called the FBI and tried to kind of turn myself in.
Okay.
See if I could just turn myself in. I was trying to negotiate like a plea agreement. That didn't work out. Mm-hmm. The FBI the woman was
not going for that.
Yeah, she wanted to, but they basically, during the conversation, I realized she was lying to me about a couple of things. And I said, oh, well, I don't trust you. Like, you're lying about this. And she knew she admitted she was lying. She's like, no, listen, why I can fix this. No. So that wasn't going to work. I went to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I borrowed like $3.5 million there in synthetic identity names, mm-hmm. different new synthetic identity names. And, actually, no, those were actually homeless people's names. Mm-hmm. That I had gotten social security numbers in their names and kind of done a combination of the two. So borrowed that money, and I'd had a home invasion, and the girl I was dating at that point had confided in a friend of hers. Like we knew that DATELINE NBC was coming out. Mm-hmm. So DATELINE NBC is coming out, and I realized I'm going to have to leave the United States. Mm-hmm. Like there were articles in Forbes, and there was articles in like Bloomberg, and there was tons of newspapers, but articles. But I felt like those were negligible. I could get around those.
Yeah.
But when I found out I was going to be on DATELINE, I realized that's a problem. Mm-hmm. And so I was going to leave, and we were pulling money out of the bank, of different banks. And we ended up asking a friend of the girl I was dating, we asked her friend to cash some checks. Well, that ended up sparking a conversation between the two of them, mm-hmm. and she confided who I was. And she ended up calling the Secret Service. Mm. Well, the Secret Service showed up to start watching my house. But the night before, I'd had a home invasion. These guys kicked in the door. They stole a bunch of stuff. And so I wasn't staying at the house. Me and my girlfriend, we went to another to a hotel. So the Secret Service was watching this house for 3 days.
And you're at the hotel.
I'm at a hotel.
That's funny. How in the world does that happen?
The police end up calling me.
They should have been able to see the home invasion. They were supposed to be watching it.
It was the day before. It was the day after.
Okay. All right.
The home invasion happened that night. The next morning they show up.
Got it.
So the police call and say, look, and I was living as a Joseph Carter. They said, Mr. Carter, I had surveillance cameras in my house. So I caught the whole thing on camera. They said, we'd like to come by and get the surveillance footage. I said, sure, no problem. I said, I can meet you there right now. So I drive there to meet them, And when I pull up, the Secret Service come pulling in behind me, in front of me, the sideways, and they jump out and freeze, get on the ground, get on the ground, get on the ground. I drop to the ground, and
that's when
they take me to the local Secret Service office or field office and handcuff me to the table. And I told them I wanted to talk to a lawyer. And then it took a couple of weeks to transport me back to Atlanta, which is where I was indicted out of.
Jurisdiction.
I was indicted out of South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee. So I was indicted in 4 different jurisdictions. I went back there and, pled guilty, and I was interviewed by the Secret Service for maybe 3 days. I think I was interviewed maybe 2 days, and then I was interviewed by the FBI for 3 or 4 days. Against my, explaining what I did in Florida and who helped me and what had happened on the run. But on the run, they knew everybody that helped me anyway. And the people in Florida that had helped had already cooperated.
Right. They were already part of the case.
Right. So there were although they could have indicted these people, this is now 2007.
Yeah. It says there's 13 people that they didn't indict, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I was on the run for 3 years.
Yeah. It's a long time.
So some people went to jail. They just went in. I have one co-defendant named Allison. Allison went to the FBI's office with an attorney and just told them she wanted to plead guilty. And so they said, okay, no problem. Nobody else did that. So nobody else, even though they were all on the indictment, they were never prosecuted. So none of them went to jail. Probably the person that's the least culpable was Allison.
And she's the one that went in and pled.
Right.
Yeah.
Because she felt like I hadn't do much. I didn't really do anything.
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to get any time. I think she got 30 months.
Yeah. What were you thinking? They threw a lot of stacked charges. You only need 3 or 4 charges, and then they stack them, and each one of those charges can carry 10, 20 years. And so then all of a sudden you're looking at, 400 years. What was going through your mind at the time? Because you had been on the run. So you were probably, I don't know if you'd ever say you're prepared to get caught, but you knew that it was a possibility. So when you were, and you knew you were looking at a good amount of time, how were you handling that? What were you thinking?
What was I thinking? I was thinking
it's a lot.
I wasn't thinking I was going to get caught.
Okay. You never really thought you
never really.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you understand how many times I've been pulled over by the police and gotten tickets? But I have a real driver's license and a real person's name. I have full coverage insurance. I'm driving a car that's financed in that person's name. I'm not an idiot. I'm not driving around with a broken taillight and a dead body in the trunk.
As Matt Cox driving drunk.
Right. I'm driving around as Michael Eckert or as Gary Sullivan or as Joseph Cologne.
Yeah.
I've got a valid driver's license.
So that even probably was even more of a shock then. If you really weren't thinking that you were going to get caught, being caught, knowing.
It was a total shock.
Yeah.
Listen, we just come back from spending 2 weeks in Europe.
Yeah.
So I've got 20
going in and out of the country.
I have over 20 passports issued to me in different names from the U.S. State Department. So I'm not concerned. I was concerned about Dateline, but it wasn't out yet.
Yeah.
And I figured it would come out, and I would go to Australia, right, and buy some rental properties and keep a low profile for a few years, and it would just go away. Well, that didn't happen.
That didn't happen. So you ended up getting sentenced to, was it 54 years?
No. So if they stack the charges, I think they said it was, one article says 300 years, one says 150 50. Yeah. One says if he just pleads guilty to the charges he's charged with, it was 54 years. I pled guilty. My PSI, my pre-sentence report, recommended, got 30 years to life.
Yeah.
But just before sentencing, they dropped some of the charges.
Yeah.
And, they drop the charges because they make it sound like they're doing you a favor.
Mm-hmm.
But really, if my PSI says 30 years and I plead guilty to 30 years, even on a plea agreement, it gives me the right to appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Because what was the benefit for Mr. Cox to plead guilty when he could have gone to trial and gotten 30 years?
Mm-hmm.
So why would he plead guilty to 30 years? So they dropped it to 26 years and 4 months.
Got it.
That way they could say there was a benefit for him to plead guilty.
You actually got a benefit out of pleading.
So I pled guilty to it, and I got 26 years and 4 months.
It's a lot, Matt. It's a lot.
It was a bad day.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, because I got 5 years, and that was the max of what my plea was, and it just kind of takes your breath away. I can't imagine 26 years, because that's a life of time. So when you go walk me into where you went to Coleman, right?
Yeah, I went to Coleman Federal Prison Complex. I went to the Medium.
Yeah.
Which is like a real prison.
Yeah. I kind of want to know, because you hadn't, it's an unknown world that you're walking into. I mean, you hadn't lived that life. What were your,
I was in, keep in mind, I had been in the U.S. Marshals holdover for a year. Like if you've got 20 something passports and over almost 30 different IDs or driver's licenses, you don't get bail.
Right. They're not walking you out the door to say, come on back when we.
Yeah, right. Like you can self-surrender.
We're going to voluntarily surrender on this day. No, that's not going to be your situation. So you had kind of gotten indoctrinated into the system.
Yeah, but prison is different than, county jail or the U.S. Marshals holdover. Like it's actually like a huge city.
Mm-hmm.
So I go to the Medium, and I get to the Medium, and you get bussed there, and you're walked in, and they assign you a housing unit, and you walk to the housing unit. You walk in, and you give your bed card to the officer, and he tells you where your room is, and you go in and you meet your cellie, and he says, "What's up?" And I talked to him, and he said, "What happened? How much time did you get?" And I was like, 26 years. And he's like, "Oh, what's your crime?" And I was like, it was bank fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Bank fraud, and I start naming them all off. And keep in mind, he's a guy. He's Mexican. He's there for drug smuggling. Because the makeup of that prison was probably 80%
drugs,
black.
Oh yeah,
well, it was probably 80% black, and most of those guys were there for fraud. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sorry, for drugs. The rest of them were maybe 20% Mexican, maybe 70-30. There was probably 1% of that prison that was white guys. And those white guys were there for meth.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing too, Matt, is that a lot of people out in the world think that there's white collar prisons. There is no such thing. There is not a white collar prison anywhere. But what you just did, how you kind of broke that down, that's really, especially in the feds, you're dealing with a lot of people that are dealing in drugs, and because they're crossing state lines, and those people are very smart. But I'm just saying there is no such thing as a white collar prison. Usually, the white collar person is a severe minority in any prison.
Yeah, back before they changed the federal system, right? So Reagan changed like the federal system in 86. And in the 90s, they started just arresting everybody for crack. They started taking essentially state charges.
Given the mandatory minimums that was just putting them away. Yeah.
So what ended up happening was, at that time, any types of low or camps that were predominantly fraud, white collar prisons, nonviolent white collar prisons, like those quickly became inundated with essentially high ranking or top tier state inmates.
Right.
Guys that weren't necessarily selling crack on a corner.
Right.
Maybe they were moving kilos of it.
Yeah.
Or if they were selling crack, they had crack and they had a gun.
Yes.
So they would take a
gun
$20
enhancement will affect
crack.
everything. Yeah.
Right.
So I want to know, like, how did you set up your world in there? Did you get a good prison job? Did you use your artist talent, ability? I mean, I know you started writing books, but how did you kind of engage yourself in that environment? Because you're going to be there for a while.
Yeah, it took a few years. I read for about 2 years, and I taught GED.
Yes, I remember that. You telling me that Monday.
So I did that, and then I taught the real estate class. Mm-hmm. It was the ACE course, the adult continuing education courses, and I taught that course.
Did you enjoy that, doing that?
Yeah, I did. It was the first time I actually, other than my brokers, being like one-on-one and kind of showing them how to go through that was different. Those were disclosures. Like you kind of explained to your brokers how to disclose to a client. This was actually real estate. Like how do you, and I started at the bottom, like what makes real estate real estate?
Yeah.
Like what is real property?
Yeah.
How do you know that this person owns this property? How does the bank know that? So I go through public records. I go through the plot maps. I go through the whole thing. And then, I explain why the banks are willing to lend money, how the foreclosure process works. And then I started explaining how to buy a property, how to get financing, so I went through the whole thing. I mean, it was a 12-week
But that's
course.
teaching real skills. I mean, that's something that, regardless of the situation, that person can come out of prison and use those skills. And that's very rarely can you find.
And they did.
Things. Yeah.
They did. I actually had guys that got out and sent me money.
It's fantastic.
Not a lot of money, but like $50 here, $100 here, because they'd taken the class so many times and they got out and they actually, were flipping properties or, they forget you very quickly.
That's very cool, man. I mean, a lot of what we do talking about on this show is how do you use your experience and what you've been through to be able to affect good. That is affecting good. That's giving people skills that they didn't have that they can implement into their life when they get out because they've learned it from somebody who actually knew and lived all of that and kind of knew it like the back of your hand.
Right. What's interesting is that is the first time that it gave me status. It made me an important person in prison. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that it was the first time I ever had someone that walked up to me and just shook my hand, like walked up and was just put their hand out to just kind of like, hey, I want to thank you. Mm. And this is some drug dealer with a 30-year sentence.
Yeah.
Who's massive. Mm-hmm. I'm standing at the door, like getting everybody's name for the roster. And they're walking out, and this guy walks up. This is like second class. He walks up and he goes, hey, Cox, man. He said, boom. He put his hand out. He said, man, good class, bro. Mm. I thought he was joking at first.
Yeah.
I shook his hand. But he was sincere. And then somebody else shook my hand. And then it got to a point where literally every class, 5 or 6 guys are shaking my hand and telling me how amazing that was. Then other guys start coming to me, telling me, my celly's taking your class. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay. And they're like, he says he's going to be rich when he gets out. And I'm like, I said, why? And he said, he's going to start flipping properties. Uh-huh. He said, you teach how to build. You teach how to. So we go through the whole thing, and I'm like, okay, and I'm kind of like laughing. I'm like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And so he said, I'm going to take your class next quarter. They got to the point where my class was booked for like 2 or 3 quarters in a row. But you had to sign up. You might get in 6 months. And I used to walk in. I used to love walking in. And when we got to the part about buying houses and fixing them up and flipping them or even, flipping contracts or doing whatever, I would say, how many people are here for drugs? Mm-hmm. And, they, of course, almost everybody raises their hand.
Yeah.
And I would say, this is the one time that you being a drug dealer is going to absolutely work to your benefit. Mm-hmm. I said, because you're not afraid to go into those neighborhoods. Right. I said, and you have a hustler mentality that no other investor is ever going to be able to compete with. So you guys have been hustlers your whole lives.
Yep.
And this is a legal way for you to make that work for you in a way that will make you more money than you have ever made. Listen, these guys would walk out like, bro, they come to me and they go, bro, I couldn't sleep last night.
Yeah, you got them thinking
about everything.
I think the other thing, Matt, for you is that engaged your brain, and you helping these guys. You want things in prison to help you feel like don't lose you, and that engaged your brain, and almost really was like an escape outside those walls, outside that fence, because you were doing your thing. You were talking your game, and these guys are getting so engaged that they're getting pumped up. I think it's so cool because, so many times you can use or you can have all this knowledge and you don't have a way to get it out. This was a back and forth that happened for you with these guys, and I think it's cool that you were saying that some of these guys went out there and actually made it work for them. That's very cool. Very cool.
I did that for about 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And after about 2 years, I had anticipated that, and I'd been told by my lawyer that the FBI and the Secret Service were going to continue with the investigations. So after about 2 years or so, my lawyer, I was like, what is going on? It's been forever. And she explained to me that nobody had been arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And even though the FBI had come out to see me and talk to me about, like, I had bribed a council member one time, like a city council member.
Yeah.
I'd gotten him elected and paid for
I read about all that. That was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that person ended up getting charged and convicted.
I'm sitting there saying, this guy's on the take, and they know it. They have the canceled checks. They have everybody saying, yes, we gave to his campaign. Yes, Matt had an agreement with him. He bribed him.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they have all this, they didn't have enough to indict him.
Yeah.
And sure enough, a year later, they indict him on bribery charges.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But not related to
what you were talking about. That's what was interesting about that whole thing is that you were giving them the goods of what was going on, and then he ended up getting indicted and convicted on a different bribery deal, which is interesting.
Well, what's so funny about that is there were quotes of him in the in articles where he's saying, like, this guy's nothing but a jailhouse snitch.
Yeah.
Like, he's just trying to get out of prison. Like, listen, bro, you're a politician. You're lying. Mm-hmm. I'm a criminal. I'm not lying.
Yeah.
Like, I'm telling the truth. Between you and I'm the only one telling the truth. And then he gets convicted.
He gets convicted. Yeah. Well, I'm curious too. Did they come to you? Because somebody like you, Matt, I would think that like the Secret Service and people in the government would want to understand what you were doing and you to be able to tell them what you were doing so that they could be educated to look for. Did they ever come to you and say, Matt, help us out, man. What in the hell, how did you get all this? And we want to make sure that we're smart. They do that with like guys that hack, computers and can get in and passwords and stuff. And they use it for foreign policy and whatever, or not foreign policy, but foreign espionage.
Right. But, like hacking, you know who Brett Johnson is?
I've heard of that name. Yeah.
So Brett Johnson's one of the guys that started and ran what's called Shadow Crew,
mm-hmm.
which was one of the first online credit card forums and fraud forums, really. Brett, like when Brett cooperated
mm-hmm.
and talked to I think the FBI or the Secret Service, like they had no clue what he had done.
Right.
They couldn't tell you, like he would say, well, you just run it through a socket server, and they go, what's that? Yeah. Or a CPU, you use this, or would you just take this and you do, your internet protocol, it scrambles your internet protocol, or you do and he would explain and they go, what's that?
Mm-hmm.
What's that? Like they had no clue about everything he was doing was revolutionary for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I was doing wasn't revolutionary. Like it had been done, but I was taking identity theft,
mm-hmm.
bank fraud, real estate fraud, and I was combining and the creation of synthetic identity, the creation of government documents, and I was combining them in a fraud that instead of me running a scam and making $30,000 or $40,000, I ran a scam and I would make $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
And so
your numbers are bigger.
I could tell them what I was doing, and I did. And they had never, all of them was like, I've never seen anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't saying that there's a flaw in the system and you can correct it.
Right.
I was just doing something that everybody else had done.
That was out there.
There were all these pieces are out there. Nobody had just arranged them. Right. And that was really the problem for me, was that it was so easy for them to connect me to everything.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a system the FBI uses, I guess the Secret Service uses it too, where it asks questions. Is the subject male? Yes. What's the age range? Yes. Was identity theft used? Yes. Was, and then they start naming off all the things that were used in the scam, and it very quickly narrows down. It's one of these 4 people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm the only number that came up.
Mm-hmm.
I was told, look, when we put you into, and I forget the name of the system. I don't know if I forget the name of it. They named it some acronym. They were like, you're like one of the only people. There's like 3 or 4 people that come up. One person's in prison. One person's dead.
Mm-hmm.
And you.
And you're the guy that was connecting all the dots.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that filled all the boxes. Interesting.
So what I did do was I ended up writing an ethics and fraud course.
Okay.
Because you have to understand
while you were in prison.
Yes.
Yes.
So here's what happened. My assistant U.S. attorney that was in charge of my case, she had asked me to be interviewed by DATELINE.
Mm-hmm.
And she said to me, look, if you're interviewed by DATELINE, I will consider it substantial assistance. Now, substantial assistance is the word they use for cooperation, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll consider it substantial assistance, and we will reduce your sentence. And I was like, oh, okay. So my lawyer's like, yeah, you be interviewed by DATELINE, they'll reduce your sentence.
Yeah.
So I'm interviewed by DATELINE. So when I go to sentencing, my lawyer says, what are you going to recommend he get? And they said 26 years and 4 months. And she said, but that's what he's already going to get. And what about the cooperation? She said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give him cooperation, but you told him
mm-hmm.
he would get cooperation if he was interviewed by DATELINE. She said, no, I said I'd consider it substantial assistance. I did consider it. It's not enough.
It's not enough.
So while I was incarcerated, I was contacted by American Greed.
Mm-hmm.
And I called my attorney. My attorney called the U.S. attorney, and the U.S. attorney said, if he's interviewed by American Greed, we'll consider it substantial assistance and we'll reduce his sentence. And she said, okay, this time. She was, oh yeah, absolutely this time. So I was interviewed by American Greed. It aired. We put in a motion to have my sentence reduced. And they said, we've considered it. It's just not enough.
That's interesting because, you and I both talked about this on the American Greed thing. Both of us had American Greed played while we were in prison. I didn't ever get that offer. You must have been a lot more interesting because they never came and said, Cassidy, you do American Greed and talk to us, because they wanted me to talk to them, but I didn't see there was any benefit to it because I've never seen anybody on the show that they give any real, they'll take their sound bite so that they can voice over it or whatever. But, I never got that opportunity to say, hey, we'll reduce a little bit, but I didn't have as many years.
Well, keep in mind too, you probably also said immediately, I'm not going to be interviewed.
True.
So what I did was I called my lawyer and I said, can I get something if I'm interviewed? And she said, hold on. She calls the U.S. attorney. U.S. attorney said, yes.
Okay. Yeah. I never even went that far, which is smart on your part.
My U.S. attorney was a media hound.
Okay.
She loves media.
Yeah.
But once again, wasn't going to give me anything.
Yeah.
So then I was contacted by a guy who runs the national.
I want to go back to. I don't want to just walk over the American Greed thing, because the how was that? What was the reaction to your American Greed episode in your prison?
So I didn't see it in prison.
Oh, you didn't see it?
No, but the guards saw it.
Interesting.
And other inmates saw, because nobody called me and said it's going to be on Tuesday night.
Okay.
So I missed the episode. But what I was in prison for was Dateline.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat there and watched my Dateline.
Okay.
And, that
what was your reaction to that?
I mean, it was, the guys, and I genuinely mean this after weighing all of the criteria and weighing everything that happened and everything I went through and knowing the story and everything that I said. The guy, what's his name? Stacy Keach.
Yes.
Who owns the production company that makes those shows,
mm-hmm.
by the way.
And
he is genuinely an absolute scumbag.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, an absolute scumbag. Like, I get it. Like, I'm a scumbag. I'm in prison. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine. But if you took the interview that occurred and what he did with that interview, it's
unbelievable.
It's
I've talked to people
like,
who've been on. It's crazy.
Like he literally just, they cut it. They had me laughing and joking and smiling at places that were completely inappropriate.
Right.
They had me saying things that were inappropriate. When he would ask a question, they'd take another answer and slice it in there.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a complete fraud.
Yeah. And that's why people like to watch it.
Right. But keep in mind too, I get it. Like I understand, like, the problem is that when you really weigh that out, it's like saying, they said I murdered 13 people. That's a lie. I only murdered 11. Right. Like, I'm still a scumbag. I may not be a 13 level. I'm an 11, but it's like, in the end, everyone's like, so it wasn't true. No, it was about 95% true.
Yeah. There were pieces.
Yeah. 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 Like they put a twist, they put a shitty twist on everything.
Yeah.
But in the end,
there's a realm of truth that runs through. Yeah. Of
course. Did you borrow this much money? Yes.
Yes.
But I didn't borrow it in the way that what does it matter?
It doesn't. And it's so hard to like when I don't ever talk about it. I mean, we're talking about it here, but I don't ever talk about it because it's just like, I get it. It's on, you saw it, you think what you want, Yeah.
Like everybody that knows me, they don't believe that.
Yeah.
Like they watch it and they just shake their head and they're like, oh my God.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
How many years did you end up doing? 11?
I did 13.
13.
Yeah.
Okay. So 13 years is a long time. When you got close to the door getting out, were you like, man, I don't know. This has been a long time. I've been in here. What's it like out there? Was there any anxiety on your part? Obviously everybody wants to get out, but did getting closer to the door, plugging back into society, what were you thinking?
Yeah, I was okay in there.
Yeah.
Like by that point, after about how many years? After probably 5 years,
mm-hmm.
6 years, about 6 years, I was really good. Like I wanted out, obviously.
Sure. Nobody likes
okay.
to be, told what to do.
Well, I had a great routine.
Mm-hmm.
I knew everybody. I had a great routine. Nobody bothered me. Nobody, people I had respect for me
mm-hmm.
to a degree. I had a good group of friends that I hung out with. I liked. I was writing people's stories, which I loved.
Mm-hmm.
I had plenty of time to write their stories. Like,
yeah.
Unfortunately, out here, writing your story requires me to say, "Hey, you've got to give me $10,000 or $20,000 to do this." Like,
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? So
just
I can't just write your
stamps and commissary and.
Yeah, but I'm not. They're not paying me. I'm
right.
saying.
Right, I know what you're saying.
I don't have to make bills. I can just write the story.
Exactly.
I'm not on a. There's not a time crunch.
Right.
There's not. It's just for enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to do that, and so I had a really good routine. And towards the end, when I realized I was going to be getting out, because I got my sentence cut twice.
Mm-hmm.
So as I'm about to get out, I was very uncomfortable, very concerned about what I was going to do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to make a living?
Yeah.
Who's going to hire me? I didn't realize how perverted the world had become,
mm-hmm.
Just society in general. Like when I went locked up, there were no iPhones, there were no smartphones, there was no YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
YouTube had been out for like a year or so.
It's funny because you're huge on YouTube.
I'm huge on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I didn't know that. Like, I didn't know. I genuinely thought I'm going to end up working at like McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to rent a room,
mm-hmm.
and I'm just going to kind of, go about my life and try and put something together. And I also had the comforting thought that if things went bad
mm-hmm.
and I couldn't pay my bills and I couldn't make a living, I could always just commit fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I had to go back to that life, I would. And the problem is, I make it sound like it's a horrible thing or horrible life. Like I didn't want to go back, but the truth is, I think about it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think about it because when I initially started committing fraud, it was kind of like to get money.
Mm-hmm.
But then I had money, and I just kept doing it because I liked it.
And you were good at it.
Yeah, I was good at it. You want to be good at something. You feel confident. You feel pride in being good at something, even if it's horrible.
Yeah. Were your parents were they when you went through all this? How did that all play out for you?
I mean, my mother would come see me every 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's nice.
She came to see me every 2 weeks for 13 years. My father came to see me maybe 3 times
while you were in.
While I was in.
Yeah.
My 2 sisters never came to see me. My brother came to see me, but only because somebody had to take my mom. And my other sister would actually pay him to come see me.
Mm-hmm.
Would pay him to drive her.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't want to come see me. He's not interested in coming to see me. So
that's interesting. So your mom was a constant every 2 weeks.
Yeah, constant.
Yeah, that's cool.
My dad died while I was in prison.
Yeah, that's tough. I think death in prison is a dark thing, regardless of what your relationships are with people. With death, just having somebody die on the outside just shows you how far away you are from things.
Right. I was never close with my dad, so it didn't upset me.
Yeah.
And I knew he was sick.
Yeah.
I knew he was sick, and but I got out just in time to spend the last couple of years with my mom.
That's nice. Thank God you got out and were able to do that.
Yeah.
So Matt, tell us, like, what are you doing now? Because I mean, you got out in 2019. That's not very long ago, but you've really, in your world, hit the ground running. You're a name. Inside True Crime is a big deal. You've continued to write. Can you kind of just tell everybody what's going on in your life now?
I mean, so I wrote all of these stories while I was incarcerated, all these prisoner stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I got some guys in like Rolling Stone magazine, and I realized that I could option their film rights,
mm-hmm.
right? Or their life rights, really. And so I optioned the life rights of a couple of the guys that I wrote stories about, and they just keep being reoptioned.
Mm-hmm.
I got one that's been reoptioned like 4 times. So, whether it'll ever become a movie or not, I don't know, but they do keep optioning it.
You need to be a movie.
Yeah. Well, I actually just started working on that,
okay,
to be honest. So I have, then I got out and I optioned the film or the life rights of a couple other guys that I wrote stories on. And I wrote like 5 books while I was locked up, and I've written 2 more since I got out. So, those books they're not bestsellers. They do all right. I would say, look, they keep me from having to pay my car payment and insurance and gas. I get a little bit of money every month, which is great. I run a podcast. I'm on people's podcasts. I also do.
Which is called Inside True Crime, by the way.
Yeah, but you just put Matt Cox. If you put Matthew Cox,
you'll find him. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll find me. There's no way you're not. So I do that. I do. I'm a keynote speaker at mortgage conventions.
I'm sure you are.
Brokerage businesses. It's funny. I was going to say I was at one the other day, and like the Department of Banking and Finance for Alabama was there, and the guys, like, there was like a group of them. They were just disgusted that I was,
Sure.
So anyway, so I do that. And like I said, I go on different guys' podcasts. I also do consulting, and I don't want to say TV personality, but it's more like if you're running they'll have me come in as like a fraud expert on a TV show.
Makes all kinds of sense, for sure.
Right.
You are an expert.
Right. But I mean, it's a different kind of.
Yeah.
So it's also, and I've had several programs about me. I was just on My True Crime Story on VH1, and I was on, I guess, Curiosity Stream. They have a company just did a 1-hour program called Inside the Mind of a Con Artist. And, I'm working with a production company right now to try and get a documentary done.
Yeah.
And I've been offered over and over again for that. And I've always said, like, no. I've always convinced them to look at one of my other stories.
I just think it'd be fascinating. And the girl that wrote that story in the Atlantic, you were trying to pitch her on another story. And she says, whoa. I want to talk about you. I want to talk about your story. Yeah. Yeah.
That was how I contacted, because I was working with a bunch of different reporters while I was incarcerated for different guys' stories.
Yeah. You were pitching another story. And she said, it's a little more complicated. I don't know about that, but I like your story. And then that became, really I sat there and read it last night. My wife's saying, what are you doing? I said, I'm reading this Atlantic story. She said, you've been reading for a long, I'm not the fastest reader, but that was a big article, but it's a great article. If anybody wants to read that article, that's a great article. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff about you that's fascinating. That's why I think there's no doubt in my mind that whether it was a movie or a documentary, it would be fascinating because of how you did it. And you can tell a good story too, Matt. A lot of people have a story, but they can't tell their story. And you've got those two things locked in, and that's the secret sauce. You have a story that's fascinating, but you can also tell it. That's not something everybody can do. I want to ask you this though, Matt, because you do have a fascinating story and it's been a journey. I think you're a little bit kind of close to my age. I'm 55. I think you're 53. Yeah. Okay. So we're kind of close. What do you think's your biggest takeaway through all this you've been through? What can you tell them out there?
The problem is that it's such a cliche and you hear it all your life, is that, it's just that like money it really just doesn't make you happy.
True. Like
I had tons of money. When I was committing fraud and everything, I had tons of money. And I don't want to say I was riddled with guilt or anxiety, because I wasn't. I loved committing fraud and I loved what I was doing. And, and I know that's sad and it's not the right thing to say, but it's just the truth. But the problem was I was doing, it's like, who Gary Vee is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He's huge.
Okay. So Gary Vee always says, like, you're buying all this stuff in order to impress people that hate you or people that don't even like you.
Exactly.
And I didn't realize, like, that for me was so true. And it's funny because I'd never been able to articulate that feeling until I heard Gary Vee. I got out and heard him. And when he said that, I was like, wow.
Makes sense.
Like, that was something. I came to that conclusion when I was locked up.
Yeah.
But I'd never really been able to articulate it that simply.
Yeah.
And he did such a great job, simplifying it. And that's what it was. I was desperately trying to impress all of these people by having a bunch of money and being extremely clever. And in the end, those people didn't care about me or like me. Right. They were around me because I paid for their vacation or I got them, this guy makes a couple $100,000 and this guy made $1 million and this guy. So all these people that I'm helping, my dollar amount that they finally hit me with was like 15 million.
Yeah.
My mortgage company did 55 million.
Yeah.
So I'm responsible for 15 million. So people made hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And those are some of those same people were never indicted. Yeah. And those same people now don't even want to talk to me because they're like, because they have this status, because they're now trying to impress all of their friends that don't really care about them.
Yeah.
So, so I think that it's funny because I was happier in prison with nothing just writing, hanging out with a group of guys that didn't want to do anything other than hang out with me because they liked me.
Yeah.
There's no benefit.
No. And you go in there. The one thing I've always said about prison is you go in on your own by yourself and you come out on your own by yourself. And what you do on the inside there, you just got to be and make it, happen for you. And some guys do, some guys don't. And, I think,
what's funny?
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's the great equalizer.
It's an unbelievable equalizer. I've said that to so many people about prison. It's like a really weird place of a high school you wouldn't want to go to, but it's kind of that world where, you've got all these different groups and how you fit into those groups and whether you're respected, because respect is such a big deal in a primitive environment, but you can find a way to adapt and work through it. That's the thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Listen, it's funny, and it has nothing to do with like where you were born or what color your skin is or what your religion is, because the truth is I would meet a guy that had been raised, white guy, middle class, and I would talk to that guy, and you would talk to him on and off for a month and realize like he was just in his core was just a complete scumbag. There was just nothing redeeming about him.
Nothing.
And then I would talk to some drug dealer.
Yes. Who
is to me the lower class. And this drug dealer was just an amazing guy. Like he's brilliant and he's smart, and he was raised in the same neighborhood as this guy, this other drug dealer. This guy scumbag, this guy, just an amazing person. He read all the time. He was articulate. He was smart. He tried to educate himself. You would meet these guys, and what happens is you end up surrounding yourself by people that you genuinely like and admire and what their character is. And you realize right away that it doesn't matter that you were born in Mexico in the slums. He's a good guy that's smart, and I respect him. Yeah. And he's worked on himself.
Matt, I think what you said is, I think what you said is so clear, right to the point. Is it's an equalizer. It doesn't matter because nobody's going anywhere. We're all staying right here. So who are you? And then that is who and how everybody reacts to you. There's no hiding. There's nowhere to go. You're all there for however long. Yeah, it's fascinating. Your story's fascinating, Matt. I really appreciate you coming on because I guess the easiest way to look for you, I mean, it's so easy to find you, but you're huge on YouTube, Inside True Crime. You can look you up on Instagram, Facebook. Is that under Matt Cox? At Matt Cox?
Yeah, it's under Matt Cox or Cox Pop Art. I sell painting because I have a degree in fine art, so I do a bunch of painting.
You've got so many books. I'm sure, is that all on Amazon?
Oh, they're all on Amazon. Yeah, I've written 2 books since I got out, and I've got like 7 books on Amazon.
Well, I'm going to pick up and start reading your stuff because I just got my bike fixed. It's got the bike thing I can read on my pad, so I'm going to be reading some Matt Cox.
Well, I think 4 or 5 of them are on Audible.
I know you and I talked about that, and I think you gave me the name of that guy that can read the book for me. What was his name?
His name is Sean.
Yeah, I think you gave me his name. Okay, guys, we're talking about books. I wrote one, Nightmare Success, Loyalty, Betrayal, Life Behind Bars, Finally Setting Yourself Free, a memoir. Brent Cassidy, go get it. It's actually out there on Amazon and Barnes & Noble too. Everybody, love the like, subscribe, hit the subscribe button. It makes it easy. It just pops up when I put something on every week. Comments are great, helps the show. Do a little Apple review. Spotify. If you want to find me, say anything, communicate, BrentCassidy.com. As I used to say to my people on my core links, writing them back and forth, stay strong, and I'll do the same. Thank you, Matt Cox, for today. Appreciate it.
Sure.